In a moment, we'll do our 3 refuge chant together, nice and slow. Buddhang saranang gacchami, dhammang saranang gacchami, Sanghang saranang gacchami, Dutiyampi Buddhang saranang gacchami, Dutiyampi dhammang saranang gacchami, Dutiyampi sanghang saranang gacchami, Tatiyampi Buddhang saranang gacchami, Tatiyampi dhammang saranang gacchami, Tatiyampi sanghang saranang gacchami. And settle into the posture for the meditation time that makes sense for you. The sense of belonging here, now, in the moment, feeling what we're feeling. As opposed to trying to get to the experience that we think we need in order to begin our practice. It's more about realizing this is the experience with which to begin my practice. And this is what the Buddha probably means by establishing mindfulness to the fore. The first instruction in his famous set of instructions, the Anapanasati discourse. Remembering to recognize that it's like this now, that this experience is being felt, being known. And sensing, if we can, the naturalness of awareness. It's not actually something you or I do or are doing. Rather, it's something we're recognizing here and now. This experience of sitting, and more specifically, this experience of breathing in and breathing out is being known. And we can use that ordinary process of breathing in and breathing out as a kind of training ground. And the first skill we're training in is that simple tracking, connecting and sustaining with this ordinary process of breathing in and breathing out. And the breathing process doesn't have to be any particular way, so we can let go of all of those impulses to want to fix the breath, wanting the breathing process to be a particular way, but however the body's breathing now is fine. Because the training is to remember that the breathing in and the breathing out is being known. We're recognizing this awareness of the breathing process. The mind already has this potential or this capacity naturally to be aware of what the mind is knowing, what the mind is feeling, like the breath coming in and the breath going out. So can we keep that in mind? Where there's enough interest in this ordinary process of breathing in and breathing out, that the mind that's knowing, the mind that's aware, can naturally discern whether the breath is a relatively long breath or a relatively short breath. So there's enough clear comprehension to have a simple sense of each inhalation and each exhalation. It's not superficial. And it's a really important, interesting training to train to be intimate with the natural process, but at the same time not feeling obliged to control it or fix it or get tight about it in any way. But just allowing the nature of the breathing process to be what it is. Even if it's feeling erratic or feeling tight, the breath, we just trust that natural process of breathing in and breathing out to be nature. And the effort is simply to keep it in mind, or to keep in mind that it's being known. And it's appropriate to take it as a particular kind of challenge. Can I keep this natural process in mind? And we don't have to reject any of the other phenomena that are there. They just can be there in the periphery or in the background. And because of this particular interest, then the breathing in, the breathing out, with the recognition that the breathing in and the breathing out is being known, we let that be in the forefront. And learning to recognize the particular effort to keep the breathing process in mind, to not forget it. And indirectly, this will cause the mind to have to let go of everything else, all of its other concerns and obsessions, because we won't be able to keep it in mind if we feel obliged to continue with the other themes that the mind is interested in. We have to let them be there in the background. And it is possible to choose to be interested in this ordinary phenomena where we're recognizing that breathing in and then breathing out is being felt, being known. And remember to access your faith that being present, even using this simple training exercise, that being present is wholesome. And it has the flavor of freedom. So the mind will become, ultimately, will become more and more secluded from what the mind is ordinarily caught up with, the different thoughts and activities it's usually identified with. They'll fall into the background, and the mind will feel the pleasure of not being entangled in its usual activities. So when you can notice that pleasure of seclusion, we call it, it's subtle, but it can be noticed. And it's really useful, helpful to notice it. You could call it the pleasure of simplicity. And being willing to begin again and again with this simple training. Tracking the ordinary process of breathing in, breathing out clearly enough so the mind can discern the specific nature of each in-breath or out-breath. For example, if it's a longer one or a shorter one, a smoother one or a rougher one. It's not about controlling it, it's just comprehending, like being clear enough to be able to comprehend its nature, each particular in and out breath. And it's a new mental muscle to be interested in something very ordinary. And as you become more settled, you might notice that the breathing process, the physicality of the breathing process just becomes more refined. Because the body and the mind reflect each other. So as the mind becomes more settled, the breathing becomes more settled. And you can begin to notice that even as you feel the breath coming in or going out, you can cultivate a more inclusive awareness of the whole body. So now we're not afraid to be aware of the other sensations, the other sounds, sights, whatever. We're still aware of breathing in and aware of breathing out. But we're realizing in some ways it's even a more relaxed state to allow this inclusive awareness as you breathe in and as you breathe out. Everything belongs as you're breathing in. Everything belongs, everything can be allowed as you breathe out. Nothing has to be excluded or ignored, denied. Whatever's here to feel can be felt as you breathe in and as you breathe out. And we're not highlighting pain more than pleasure. We're taking it all in as it actually is, without preference. And in this way, we begin to harmonize the knowing mind, harmonizing with the totality of body, bodily sensations. And we cultivate this way of no conflict in this very simple way, the mind knowing the body. We're harmonizing, learning to be intimate in this simple, relaxed way, and feeling the natural effect of bodily calmness spreading, pervading the whole body, this embodied sense of well-being, spreading, deepening, widening, softening. It's not something we can force, something to recognize. It arises naturally with this confidence that it's safe and wholesome to be breathing in sensitive to the totality of the body. Breathing out, allowing the body to be the way it is. Not divided, nothing hidden. And allow there to be a deepening trust of embodiment, this harmonious way of being with the body, aware of the body, without any conflict or control. And we'll feel that lightness, sense the experience of embodiment in the mind, the activity of the body and the mind, all of it happening on its own, this nature unfolding, the nature of the body, the nature of the mind, and that relative absence of control and friction is experienced as a lightness in the heart, a kind of joy, joyful interest, or a buoyant feeling. Just that sense that everything can be allowed. Everything can be allowed to move as it's moving. You might even sense a subtle smile, just a lightness of heart. So practice keeping that in mind, that lightness of heart as you breathe in, and then keeping that joy in mind as you breathe out. In a relaxed way, just do the best you can. And that lightness of heart can mature into a more resonant ease, a deeper releasing and relaxing of the heart and all the more subtle ways it might be defended, a melting away of unnecessary habits of protection. The heart in a more subtle sense feels safe. And feel that relaxation of the heart, we call it ease or sukha, that more refined pleasure of the heart related to contentedness, breathing in, knowing that sense of ease of heart. Breathing out, knowing, sensing that ease of the heart. Keeping the ease in mind. And perhaps sensing a greater quality, deeper quality of stability. It's really okay to feel the pleasure of that ease. And it really can shift how the mind relates to mental activity. Thoughts and feelings and perceptions. So notice that more spacious or dispassionate way of observing whatever mental activity there is. Just thoughts being known. Even the Dharma thoughts that we might have, they're just thoughts too. Come, they go. You can have a lot of dispassion, a lot of spaciousness around any mental activity. And just noticing this naturally will quiet the thinking mind, all mental activity, this more spacious, dispassionate attitude. until the thoughts will become more refined and less intrusive, probably less capable of disturbing that sense of space, the space of the knowing mind. So now we're keeping this sense of space in mind as you breathe in, sensing, intuiting this sense of space as you breathe out. Space of the present moment, the space of the mind. So we're learning that we can be interested in the space of the present moment and not so much what's happening or what's being known, but more interested in the here and now, the space of here and now. So obviously this is subtle, so take up this training to keep this subtle sense of the space of the mind in mind as you breathe in, and then keeping it in mind as you breathe out. And really appreciate the refinement, the subtlety, and all the wholesome qualities that are there, keeping this space of the mind, the space of the knowing mind in mind. So breathing in, appreciating the silence, the stillness, the peacefulness. Breathing out, keeping this all in mind and appreciating, gladdening. Sensing its trustworthiness. This mind that is so empty of its normal, agitated, fragmented, divided, and it remains more whole and empty of agitation, empty of disturbance. So the next step is to sense what's not here, how beautiful this mind that is empty of disturbance, of whatever might fragment it or divide it. And really trust and abide and relax. Surrender even. So this next step, breathing in, releasing the heart, releasing the mind. Breathing out, releasing the mind, the heart. from this place of calm, to whatever degree there is this sense of calm, pervasive calmness of body and mind, without doing anything special or anything different, we just begin to notice how even these refined phenomena, subtle thoughts, subtle sensations, just noticing the ephemeral or changing nature of all the bodily and all the mental activities. So we're keeping the ephemeral or changing nature in mind as we breathe in and out. One of my teachers describes this instruction as keep calmly knowing change. But it's right here, we don't have to send the attention anywhere. So whatever it is that the mind is sensitive to, notice its changing nature. Dharma thoughts are ephemeral. They come and go. Doubt changes. Even qualities of peace and calm are like a river of calmness. It's flowing, moving, strengthening and weakening. And sensing the quality, the understanding that nothing whatsoever needs to be clung to here. No aspect of this activity of the mind or body requires any kind of holding, any kind of fixation. This is what we mean by dispassion, this understanding of the inappropriateness of holding, clinging, grasping, and the heart beginning to sense the wisdom of letting go. How natural, how appropriate that is to just let everything be. Nowhere to go, nothing to attain, no one to become, nothing to get rid of. Nothing whatsoever needs to be grasped. And as best we can, realizing moments of that mind, this mind free of grasping. Like a beautiful free fall. Letting go without remainder. So in your own pace, begin to move your body and stretch it a little if you need. Whatever will help you. Feel comfortable and at ease. Welcome everyone. Nice to see you here tonight, week 7 of our 8-week summer class on this really powerful central teaching on the 5 spiritual faculties. It's just one of the central maps, the Buddha describing how it is awakening happens. You know, dependent origination, which is one of our classes we do for Buddhist studies, is how the Buddha addresses the question, how is it that suffering can be a natural process? Because when I'm suffering, it feels so personal, right? But if I understand your teachings, Buddha, dear one, that seemingly personal experience of me suffering is just a natural process. And so the Buddha in that teaching on dependent co-arising, like how it is when the conditions, supporting conditions are there is this appearance of me suffering. And when those supporting conditions aren't there, that appearance of me suffering isn't there, right? And then so these other maps, the maps of awakening, like the 5 spiritual faculties, the Buddha is basically saying, you know, how, because just like suffering can feel very personal, waking up and experiencing moments of real freedom and moments of real clarity and more exalted, enlivened states of mind, concentration, that also can feel really personal. Like, wow, my practice is really deepening, and what's happening to me is really great. And that's just going to be, that's natural for when the natural fruits of purifying the mind arise for us. Whatever that tendency in our heart to personalize experience of pain or pleasure, well, that habit is going to express itself like, that's happening to me. And I can't wait to tell my friends about it, you know, or whatever. So that does happen, which is why it's really nice to have a set of teachings that can build the confidence that this amazing thing that seems to be happening to me through the years of my practice is just a very natural process that can be totally trusted. Because when the supporting conditions are there for awakening, like the confidence that comes out of our experience, and the effort that comes out of the confidence, and the effort being directed to being present, and using our capacity to be present to stabilize the capacity of being present, samadhi, which is inevitably leads to insight, the deepening of wisdom. The Buddha talks about it in the same way a big river like the Ganges in northern India, in the same way it naturally inclines to the ocean. The mind that has this wise, sati, awareness, and the stability of awareness, it naturally inclines to nibbana. And nibbana is just that fruit of awakening of the mind, seeing things, seeing basically what it hasn't seen, because the mind's been distracted and the perceptions have been distorted based on habits, like seeing things in a personal way, seeing things as being permanent in ways that they're not really permanent, or beautiful or ugly in ways that they're not ultimately beautiful or ugly experience. Right? and they're not personal. But that's how we see things. But that's habit. So the deepening of insight is really the mind coming into alignment with things as they are, so free of those distortions of seeing permanence where there isn't permanence, seeing things as being personal in ways that they're not really personal, seeing things in this dualistic way of good and bad when experience is neither good nor bad. It's just this thing being known, this phenomena being known. And what I found, in terms of really understanding, because we're at that place now where we've been talking about awareness and getting clear, right? Like what skillful effort, how to use that effort of abandoning and preventing qualities of mind that are not going to lead to present moment awareness, and developing and maintaining the qualities of mind that are going to support present moment awareness, right? That's wise effort. So then we get a sense of what it means to recognize, we're recognizing that capacity to be aware. We're not doing it, like right now, because it's really helpful to do it in all kinds of moments through the day. That's what builds the momentum. And in a way, the moments that strike us as, oh, this isn't the best moment for me to recognize awareness, I'll do it later, right? Those are actually the best kind of moments to recognize that capacity to be aware, right where you think you shouldn't do it. That's what really builds momentum. When you have doubt or some certainty that this isn't the right moment to be aware, and to realize that thought itself is just something being known. That really builds the momentum and the trust in awareness. And the more momentum, at some point there's enough momentum in present moment awareness that the momentum maintains the momentum. That's, in a way, one of my definitions of samadhi, right? When there's enough force, enough real devotion, like the heart appreciates it, loves it, it values present moment awareness, and it builds a momentum. So then that devotion, that valuing, keeps the awareness in mind. The mind keeps remembering to recognize the awareness because it's so valued, so appreciated, so dear to the heart. We're really, in a funny way, we're involved in a love affair with awareness. And the thing is, it's not so easy to depict, like, let me show you a picture of my dear one, and show your friend, here's me being aware, or something like that. It wouldn't really work. But we inwardly, at least, we want that relationship. Really sensing, like taking the time when there's some awareness, when we're recognizing awareness, rather, taking the time to appreciate its value. Oh yeah, this is good in all ways. This doesn't have negative side effects. Awareness doesn't have negative side effects. If whatever it is you're observing or noticing in your mind has negative side effects, it's probably something else. And the great thing about getting that is it really helps, because it's not just from faith to effort to awareness to the stability of awareness to insight, the deepening of insight, to more confidence or more faith. It's not just in that direction, it's going back and forth. Because when we have a sense of what it is to be aware, then we understand so much better the kind of wise effort that supports remembering to be aware, or remembering to recognize awareness. So, and how to use faith. So it goes, it goes both ways. But what I find, like in helping us understand that transition, because it's a bit of a leap, what the Buddha says, that nobody deepens understanding, or nobody does awakening. Awakening is a natural process that just simply depends on the stability of present moment awareness. The secrets, which are just whatever it is the mind hasn't sensed clearly, hasn't comprehended deeply. And I'm talking more in this intuitive sense, not in a cognitive sense. All that the heart and mind hasn't sensed, hasn't realized, will be revealed when there's enough stability of awareness. Because that's the very definition of the stability of awareness, is that mind, heart, that can sense things as they are. And the 16 instructions in the Anapanasati Sutta that we went through in the guided meditation tonight really help us get clear how that works, why that is a natural process, how, in a sense, it can't be stopped. Like when the ingredients are there, insight will deepen. And it all has to do with uncovering and recognizing and keeping in mind this thread of inner pleasure. It's the pleasure of the mind not orienting around sense experience. And initially it's just, you could describe it as kind of the relief of my mind not being pushed and pulled by my thoughts about things. So when we do the initial instructions, and by the way, I included a link for the 16 instructions in the email that I sent everybody today, so you can take a look at that document. It's just a short version of the sutta, the discourse, where the Buddha is just going through the 16 steps. And the initial part is, bringing our attention to, in an exclusive way, to the physicality of breathing in and out. And initially, like when we get some continuity, just being intimate with that physicality of breathing in and breathing out, then we'll feel the pleasure of the mind not doing what it normally does, worrying and planning and whatever the mind is engaged in most of the time. It's not doing that because somehow, one way or another, we've inspired it enough to remain attentive to this ordinary process of breathing in and breathing out. And to sustain that attentiveness, it had to drop all of its other activities. The planning, the worrying, the speculating, the analyzing, the wondering if I'm doing the mindfulness of breathing correctly. Like even that, there's no room for it when the mind is interested in that physical experience, like feeling the movement of the abdomen as it expands and feeling the movement of the abdomen and chest as it contracts, right? Just the getting interested in that physicality of that movement, or the physicality of the touching, as the air touches the nostrils on the way in and touches the nostrils on the way out. So it doesn't matter how you're feeling the breath. What matters is the integrity of that interest and the unwavering of that interest, because that will break the spell, the habit of whatever else the mind is inclined to do with its bandwidth, because it doesn't have any bandwidth, because it's all being directed to the tracking of the physicality of breathing in and breathing out. And that's how we begin connecting with the thread of pleasure, because that pleasure, even though it's in a sense pleasure like we know it, but it's arising more because of what the mind isn't doing than what it is doing. Right? It's the abandoning It's the distance from the, agitating activity, the usual agitating activity of the mind. What was that sound? Well, that reminds me of, what am I going to do tomorrow? All of that, and each time the mind goes to an object on that more ordinary level of awareness, consciousness, then it immediately has a job to do, right? It has to figure out what that object is. It has to tell it, it thinks, right? We think, we have to tell ourselves what it is that I'm sensing. So each sense experience that comes into the forefront, because there's obviously many, many sense experiences in each moment, but one will be predominant, and the mind will, this be known, and it will tell itself what it's knowing, as if it doesn't already know, right? And then in that process of knowing what it is, telling itself what it is, knowing what the, to some degree, how it feels to be knowing that, to be having this experience. And then we'll remember everything from the past that's at all associated with this particular sense experience or thought, which generally will become the next predominant experience. One of the things that arises because of this sense experience then becomes the next sense experience or thought being known, predominant experience being known. And that's the sort of general mode of being lost in thought. So we break that cycle. We realize we don't have to be dependent on the exclusive attention to the meditation object. We can have this more inclusive awareness of the whole body. And the body really in terms of the 5 physical senses, to whatever degree they're sensitive when we're meditating. And that harmonizing begins, it kind of widens and deepens that pleasure. So then we have this embodied well-being where the mind has learned that it doesn't have to be afraid or controlling or in conflict with embodiment, with whatever's arising through the 5 physical senses. And that feels good. And that feeling good, that embodied well-being, it allows for a dropping in. And in that dropping in, what I mean by dropping in is the mind, the more subtle habit of the mind to be kind of an animal who's vigilant about threats, that part of the mind begins to relax. And as it relaxes, there's just this background sense that everything is just happening on its own. We're just there, breathing in, aware of the whole body, breathing out, aware of the whole body, right? Of course, we're also to some degree aware of mental activity. But there's just more well-being, and because of that, more trust. And because of the trust, that sense of, that subtle, pervasive sense of being vigilant in as if a threat could come up, begins to relax. And as it relaxes, just because it's relaxing, then a more subtle truth, which is always here, which is it's all happening on its own. Mental activities happening on its own, bodily activities, internal, external. It's just the dance, of causes and conditions. And on some intuitive level, that's sensed. And to whatever degree that's sensed, there's a lightness. Because that sense of it all happening on its own, that is not theoretical, it's a felt sense, right? That sense is like parallel to the dropping of the opposite sort of view that I got to hold it all together. I got to stay on top of this all, right? So it's really related to that trusting. And so that's the joy which matures into a deeper sense of ease, which is really that maturing of trust, like that sense of a me who has to be vigilant and on top is getting replaced with a sense that it's okay to relax in these more subtle ways. more okay to allow. Because we're following that thread of pleasure, we're seeing that it's the relaxation of the heart itself that encourages the heart to continue to relax more on more and more subtle levels, or the abandoning, the shedding of more subtle ways of the heart being defensive or armored or held. It all just begins to melt. And the key is to be interested in that pleasantness, that more and more subtle pleasantness. And then because of the more profound contentment and ease, then it's really a nice time. The Buddha invites us to be aware of mental activity, because now mental activity isn't sort of being used by the vigilant one who's trying to get a nice experience or get away from painful experience, because the heart's feeling pretty content. So it doesn't need the thinking process, the mental activity in this hungry way to get away from pain or to get toward pleasure. So now the wisdom can observe mental activity, but from a different perspective. I don't need the mental activity. It doesn't need to be put to use to get me away from pain or towards pleasure. So I can observe it in a more neutral, spacious, dispassionate way. And it's all leading up, this is all like understanding how the stability of present moment awareness, how does stability become stable? How does the stabilizing process move in the direction of greater stability? And it's really about the shifting, like noticing pleasure, this inner pleasure. It's really a pleasure of renunciation. At each sort of level, you could say, something more subtle is being let go of. Like at the beginning, when we're being asked to be attentive to just the ordinary physicality of breathing in and out, right? We're abandoning, we're renouncing the mind's devotion to knowing all of whatever it is that arises in my experience. So I'm letting go of that vigilance of wondering what that sound was. It all can be there, but now it's there in the background because I'm choosing, the mind is choosing to be interested in the meditation object, whatever that might be, like the breath. So each stage, that is the process of stabilizing present moment awareness. Realize that letting go of the gross that allows the mind to open to the subtle. Notice that there's a thread of pleasure, and as that pleasure becomes more refined, it's, in a sense, more healing. And wisdom will recognize it as very appropriate, very wholesome, what the heart wants. And it's like a wholesome desire. The Buddha, in one teaching, said, do we need to be afraid of this kind of pleasure? And he answered the question, no. I mean, it is possible to get attached to the pleasure of samadhi, but that attachment itself undermines the pleasure of samadhi. So in a sense, it's self-correcting. If you start taking it personal, that pleasure, and getting exuberant about how much pleasure there is, you will lose the pleasure. Because getting exuberant, getting identified with it, wasn't the cause for the deepening. The cause for the deepening is a renunciation, from a grosser renunciation to more and more subtle renunciation. So initially we're renouncing the diversity of sense experience, and that kind of leads to that embodied well-being. Because now the mind is sensitive, is intimate with the bodily experience, but it's intimate precisely because it didn't feel like it had to do anything with sense experience. Sight, sound, smells, tastes, and touches. That's what allowed for the intimacy, and the intimacy with the body is what allows for the absence of conflict. So there's can be a profound integration. There's a lot of therapeutic healing in that first part of the practice. Just feeling deeply, deeply like we belong, like it's okay for moments at a time, and sometimes for long periods of time, to be not afraid. Really in the sensitivity of the body, but not afraid of the exposure to sights, sounds, thoughts, smells, tastes, touches. And then the next part, what the relinquishment, the letting go, is really of letting go of any dependence on our thoughts. It's like there's a sense of independence, like thoughts are a tool to pick up and use when that tool is useful, but otherwise that capacity to think and analyze and feel and all the mental activities, that just can be there in the background. And because mental activity is not being identified with, it naturally goes quiet or quieter. And then that allows for that next deepening where we're not just abandoning sense experience, the attachment to sense experience or the attachment identification with thought, but now we're abandoning or renouncing or letting go of any kind of selfing whatsoever, any sort of view, or you could even say meaning. That's the third set of instructions. And that's sort of the ultimate stabilizing of concentration, is the mind that's not dependent on anything. And that, when I was giving the instruction about the space of the mind and appreciating, gladdening, valuing that space, that stillness, that peace, and really learning to trust it and to sort of like leaning back, abiding or being the stillness. Because what we want to realize is the mind isn't dependent on anything, doesn't need anything. And the emphasis is on thing, anything. There's something profoundly complete already, and that's the level of the pleasure now. Is there something full? Last week, maybe some of you remember, I talked about that flavor of fullness. There's something that's full or complete or without a problem already. And that's what, in a sense, wisdom is keeping in mind, naturally. And that allows for some degree of release, like the mind will release any dependency. Now, the thing is, there's often more subtle dependencies that remain unseen. So initially, it releases the need for grosser levels of dependencies, like, this is happening to me and I'm so happy it's happening to me, this peaceful sit I'm having. Like, that's relatively easy to see, like, that's extra. Personalizing how good my sit is going, I don't need to do that. Nobody needs to do that. And by just tuning in, this is the gladdening or the appreciating, is really tuning into what's actually relevant here. Or the peace is what's actually relevant here. The stillness, the silence, the absence of disturbance is what's actually relevant here. Not that it's happening to me. So a lot of the grosser kind of habits of selfing go. But there's just likely to be more subtle, right? But the way they get uprooted is by trusting the stillness, the silence, the emptiness, the mind empty of self, empty of selfing, empty of any dependency. And then there's the experience, to some degree, of the mind free of selfing, free of that experience. And once the mind has that experience to some degree, then it all of a sudden the path is much clearer. Oh, this is what the path the Buddhist path is about. This, realizing this mind, realizing a mind, the mind, free of grasping, free of selfing, free of any dependency. And then the next set of instructions is just understanding, like, well, what supports that, the deepening of that experience. And the Buddha tells us, well, you keep the ephemeral nature in mind. So from that place of calm, let me just read this passage from Ajahn Chah. I think he did such a nice job at talking about this point. Would you turn the top two lights up about a third of the way? You need to do the flap, and then the side could be a third. Yeah, perfect. Great, thanks. So this is from Ajahn Chah's book called The Collected Teachings of Ajahn Chah. He didn't write the book, of course. It was just transcriptions of talks. Whatever occurs in your field of experience is merely what it is. When something pleases us, we decide that it is good, and when something displeases us, we say it isn't good. That is only our own discriminating minds giving meaning to external objects, right? So we break that habit initially by just being with the breath, because we can't do that discriminating habit when we're tracking breathing in and breathing out. And he continues, when we understand this, then we have a basis for investigating these things and seeing them as they really are. When there is tranquility in meditation, it's not necessary to do a lot of thinking. This sensitivity has a certain knowing quality that is born of the tranquil mind. This isn't thinking. It's Dhamma Vichaya, the factor of investigating, right? So it's a second factor of awakening. Some of you remember from our course on the 7 factors of awakening. The second one is this natural interest. Like when there's awareness, then awareness allows for this discernment. It's that quiet presence, and then that quiet presence can discern the nature of phenomena coming and going. It can comprehend or see what hasn't been seen or comprehended. He goes on saying, this sort of tranquility does not get disturbed by experience and sense contact. But then there is the question, if it is tranquility, why is there still something going on? Right? Because some tranquility, some kind of, we wouldn't call it sama samadhi. So we have this word sama, which gets translated as right usually, but better translation would be even, or a kind of stability of awareness that's in line with the way it is, supportive of seeing things clearly. So, because you can have all kinds of concentration, including a kind that puts us right to sleep. A lot of us have had that problem in some meditation sessions, right? Where we feel really calm, but it's just taking the mind right to some trance state or some sleep state. So there's something missing there. So Ajahn Chah is talking about the appropriate kind of concentration. There's something happening within tranquility. It's not something happening in the ordinary, afflicted way, where we make more out of it than it really is. When something happens within tranquility, the mind knows it extremely clearly. Wisdom is born there, and the mind contemplates ever more clearly. We see the way that things actually happen. When we know the truth of them, then tranquility becomes all-inclusive, right? It isn't dependent on, like in those first 8 steps, or even, first 12 steps. The tranquility, the stability is kind of dependent on the step, like what the movement from gross to more refined aspects of the mind. I mean, initially we're aware of aspects of the body, but very quickly we start being aware of the mind. And then more and more subtle ways. But he's saying that when the tranquility, when the stability is there, and this is really the last 4 instructions where we're aware of impermanence, dispassion, the cessation of grasping, and the relinquishment of the latent tendencies to grasp. Sort of the uprooting of the habit of taking things personally. That isn't dependent on any object whatsoever. So in a way, we might have a concentrated sit, and the mind might really want to abide in that really stable, retreated place. But then when the sit is over, then in a way we can go back to more of our wisdom practice. Just as we're living our life, just noticing, keeping in mind the changing nature. I think I mentioned this in the guided sit. Bhikkhu Analayo, this German monk who I've practiced with a lot, he sums it up by saying, keep calmly knowing change. So, we could still do our life, be functional, but even as we're doing everything, like even here, being here together on Zoom or in the room, we could be keeping calmly knowing change. The change of the sound of my voice, the change of the flow of sensation in your body, emotion, just the sense of being in the Buddhist studies class isn't a thing. It's a movement. It's a flow. It isn't a thing. It never was a thing. And can we keep that in mind? And how does that change us? And what the Buddha is saying is that it's this natural process from keeping the change in mind to the letting go of dependence or dispassion, to realizing a mind, this mind, free of grasping, to uprooting in the deeper way any tendency to go back to grasping. Because we can have a moment of awakening and then grasp it. This is going to really matter. Now I can really handle the aging process. We personalize the insight, which is okay. But with a deeper insight, then even when the mind has a thought like, this is going to really help me in the dying process. Wait till I tell my friend. But the mind, wisdom just sees that as the next thing to be dispassionate with, the next thing that's free of grasping, the next experience that the mind isn't dependent on, isn't sticky with in any way. So it's like the release keeps releasing. I think I said in the guided meditation, maybe you remember something like releasing without remainder or without anything left over. Let me read a little bit more from this. When the eye sees forms or the ear hears sounds, we recognize them for what they are. In this latter form of tranquility, when the eye sees forms, the mind is peaceful. When the ear hears sounds, the mind is peaceful. The mind does not waver. Whatever we experience, the mind is not shaken. Right? So now the tranquility is more based on wisdom, the wisdom of not being dependent on or not being reactive to sense experience, as opposed to the tranquility being dependent on being retreated from things that are agitating. Like when I'm with the ordinary flow of breathing in and out, well, for me and for a lot of us, that natural process of breathing in and out isn't triggering, right? It doesn't trigger ancient trauma or strong desire or, right? It's just so ordinary, breathing in and breathing out, that it's not triggering. So it makes, for some of us, it makes a really suitable meditation object. But with wisdom as the cause for tranquility, anything can be supportive of that tranquility, the continuity of that tranquility, because every even really provocative experiences are seen as being empty as self. And the body might even flinch. We see something disgusting. There might be some instinctual, conditioned reaction to some sense experience. But on a more subtle, deeper level, the mind isn't confused. The flinch is just something happening that's also empty of self. Just like the scene of the thing that caused the flinch is just that scene. And then that emotional reaction is just that, an emotional reaction. But each moment, then for someone with a lot of insight or a lot of momentum in their practice, each moment is empty of self. So you don't necessarily have to look weird or look like a Buddhist to be free, right? Because the non-clinging is what is really significant, the mind not being dependent or not being confused by experience. And that's a couple more sentences here. So the Ajahn Chah asks, so where does this sort of tranquility come from? It comes from the other kind of tranquility, that unknowing samatha, right? So if we want tranquility that is arising, that is connected with wisdom, first we have it, that's really coming just from this mental training. It's the same thing like when we have a lot of equanimity that's dependent on all the conditions being really nice, everyone's treating me nicely, the weather's nice, my body feels good. So I have a lot of balance, but it's a dependent balance. It depends on all the conditions being nice. But that more ordinary level of equanimity or tranquility can be very helpful, because now when I feel that tranquility, that absence of being disturbed, absence of being agitated, I feel the pleasure of the balance, the absence of being disturbed, then the heart is naturally going to be interested, like, I don't want to lose this. But we immediately start losing it by trying to make all the conditions that allowed that equanimity to arise, like glue them down so nothing changes. Keep treating me this way, weather, don't change. And obviously we start losing the equanimity, the balance, the tranquility. So, it doesn't take long before the mind, wisdom, gets very interested. Well, how can there be this balance? Because the heart really sees this. This is what I've been looking for. This non-disturbance, this peace. How can I have this no matter what is going on? And that's what Ajahn Chah means here, how that tranquility that arises from wisdom is deeply supported by a more ordinary level of tranquility. Just like we learn in doing the 16 instructions that we did tonight. We get this ordinary tranquility by training our mind, just be with the breath. Just be with the breath. Train yourself. You can do it, Mark. Just get interested in the ordinary phenomena. If you try too hard, it won't work. If you're too complacent or lazy, it won't work. You just find that particular effort of being interested in a natural process of breathing in and breathing out, and you'll feel good, because your mind won't be doing all the stuff that makes it feel bad. And you'll learn something. Oh. And then it's just a matter of that transition from the tranquility, the pleasure that was really dependent on this more gross shift in the mind, where we abandoned all of the devotion to the diversity of our sense experience and our reactions to sense experience, and we really narrowed what the mind was aware of, and that had this nice effect. But then we start opening up, but we're noticing particular things that are onward leading. And the key is to stabilize awareness, we need to be interested in that inner pleasure. And it's the inner pleasure that really will reveal what is the basic problem, which is this shift of view from a mind that is expecting sense experience to deliver happiness, to a mind that's realizing that not clinging to sense experience is a much more trustworthy, liberating pleasure. And it can't do it just by understanding that intellectually, that shift from the mind dependent on sense experience to the mind realizing its independence from sense experience. It doesn't help. I mean, it helps to know that intellectually, but we have to realize it directly. So knowing it intellectually is helpful if it gets us to practice that transition, where we realize some sense of well-being from a mind that has some distance from being pushed around by sense experience, to a mind that's really specifically interested in that pleasure of letting go. That the more it really starts to stand out, the pleasure of non-attachment. And you see, any moment will do. You could be having a conversation with your partner, and we'll be in a very ordinary way bound up with our point of view or whatever, not in a terrible way necessarily, but just in an ordinary way. But because we've been cultivating ordinary states of tranquility, we'll notice the unnecessary tension, the squeeze in the heart, the clench of the jaw, whatever it is. And that will be our dukkha itself, will be the reminder of the possibility. And this is the deepening of insight, the trust and knowing how to find this in any moment. The squeeze of attachment, and how knowing the squeeze of attachment allows for the release of attachment. It's not personal. You don't release attachment. I don't release attachment. Feeling the squeeze of attachment without judgment, with great patience, with great sensitivity, really knowing the squeeze of taking things personally is the cause for the releasing of the squeeze. There's no release without knowing the dukkha of selfing. Knowing the dukkha of selfing is the cause for the releasing. Right? And so often wisdom, and we'll talk more about this next week before we have small groups, wisdom is, in the early Buddhist tradition, is usually described as understanding the Buddhist teachings on the Four Noble Truths, which is just turning any moment of our life into, like, the only thing wisdom is interested in is squeeze and release. So that would be a really wise person. Everything they're doing, raising kids, working a job, brushing their teeth, making dinner, waking up, going to bed, everything is experienced as squeeze or release, or some transition between those two things. Dukkha and its release. That's really the teaching on the Four Noble Truths in its essence. It's that shift of view that's all actually that's relevant in our lives as human beings. Not how much money we save for retirement, not even like really wholesome thoughts. I can remember Jack Kornfield had this beautiful little phrase that I can't remember the whole thing, but the last line is, "Did I love well?" or something like that. And I don't even know if it's his, he just repeats it at least. And it's true. I mean, that's a good question. Am I loving well? But more relevant actually than that is, because what's in the way of loving well is the not understanding squeeze and release. Because when we're in subtle or not so subtle experiences of squeeze, of contraction, we're just not capable of loving well. When we're afraid, when we're greedy, we just can't love, because to whatever degree we're caught in a squeeze, it's all consuming. So even if I'm acting in a loving way, in a sort of external way, what's really going on is I'm living out of that squeeze. And all the choices I make are about getting rid of that squeeze. But getting rid of the squeeze isn't the way to get rid of the squeeze. Being intimate, knowing the squeeze for what it is. Squeeze. That's what a squeeze is. It's just that. And knowing that deeply means seeing it empty of self. There never was, it isn't a self that releases a squeeze. There never was the self in the way we think. The initial experience of dukkha is, I'm contracted, I'm hurting, I'm all bound up, right? Isn't that our experience when we're hurting? We personalize our hurt, our suffering. That's not the practice. The practice is going from there, having enough tranquility, enough confidence that comes from inner pleasure to be unafraid to be with experience. Because then we'll have the kind of patience, the kind of interest, to be intimate with whatever subtle squeeze or contraction. And see that they're impermanent, to realize, this dispassionate relationship to all of the drama around joys and sorrows, happiness and unhappiness. All of the drama around happiness and unhappiness is selfing. So the letting go is a real step away from the normal sense of there's me who's trying to be free. And that we start showing up even when we get a little momentum in our practice. The sense of stability is precisely because the mind is less entangled in the view of I'm trying to be free, I'm trying to be happy, I'm trying to get out of my bad habits of fear or anxiety or whatever. So this faith and the kind of effort, it really brings us to this potent thing called awareness, and the stability of awareness, and how it is it's really a different way of being. We're not somebody trying to attain something when we're being aware. And it feels different. It feels like an altered state, like that sense of an agenda. If that arises, that's just something being known. There's a kind of independence with the different phenomena of body and mind when we're in that place. I'll just end with a quote from another one of my teachers, Sayadaw Tejaniya. Because we want to learn about the nature of mind and objects, we don't try to calm the mind down or try to remove objects. We don't interfere or control, but observe. Because we want to understand the mind and objects in their natural state as they are happening. This is right view. Because it's only when we see them as they are that wisdom sees that they're empty of self, and letting go happens. And that's the wisdom piece. And we'll come back to that next week, our last class. Please join in for that. We'll have small groups next week. And be interested this week especially in the stability of present moment awareness and how the mind sees more clearly what it hasn't seen. The empty nature, the ephemeral nature, these three characteristics. And that's what I'll talk more about next week. But the changing nature, the unsatisfying nature, whenever there's grasping, doesn't work. Grasping doesn't work. And the impersonal nature. Really that deepening intuition that even all my self-centered habits aren't very personal. They're there. Self-centered habits are as real as anything, but they're not really personal, our self-centered habits. Right? So, enjoy your week of practice, everyone. Thanks for coming. I just want to say a word about how the center operates. It'd be nice maybe next week somebody in the community, whether you're online or here in person, would like to speak for 3 to 5 minutes about your own understanding. But you know, we don't talk a lot about money at the center, but we do ask everybody to come into relationship in your own way with, you know, given the amount of time you have in your lives and the resources you have and your own appreciation, but to find some circle of practicing receiving the teachings and the programs that you partake in as a free gift, and really let that land as a free gift be a cause, hopefully, for happiness, that it's offered freely because of everything people have done in the past. The center can operate this way, and we've been doing that for 30 years. And then also, any way you feel moved to contribute to the community, to the center, to support the livelihood of the teachers, to help us pay for our administrative staff, like Robin Major, who's our office manager, and Nancy Bowler, our bookkeeper, and Shelley and myself, who have administrative duties as well. So there's that beautiful circle. No one can tell you how to do it, but you yourself can figure out, like, well, what is the quality of that relationship? Have I learned how to receive in a way that is a cause for happiness in my life? Have I learned to give back in a way that makes sense? Obviously, some people don't have money to give. Some people don't have money or time to contribute, right? But everyone can find some way where that circle, like even just a deep appreciation that the place is available, or finding other ways to give back to the wider world. And somehow it works, just in that more functional, operational sense. You know, we meet our budget somewhere in the $350,000 to $400,000 a year to meet expenses. It seems to come in, sometimes more, sometimes less. But if you have questions about that, you can just check in with me. If you want to do more samadhi practice, join us this Saturday. I'll be leading the day-long retreat, 9:30 to 4. And then the next Saturday, Shelley Graff will be leading the half-day retreat in the afternoon. So 2 opportunities to have a little bit more time to practice. Join in if you'd like. Thanks, everyone. Have a good week of practice. See you next Monday night.
Thank you, Mark.
Good night. Thank you, Mark.